harvest stew, a hearty stew. String beef, 2 packs, about 2 kilograms. It will feed 6 to 8 people, maybe a bit more depending on how hungry you are. I'm just gonna check the size of the pieces, trim off a little bit of the fat because I don't like a lot of fat. Quite nice. And yes, I washed my hands, prepped everything. I've already got my potatoes and carrots ready to cut. Cut down on a little bit of thyme.
So you're cutting it because?
I'm cutting it into smaller chunks to help it cook quicker. Personally, that's my answer to that one.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was looking for.
I want it to cook relatively quick, like 10-15 minutes a batch, because I'm going to have to do a couple different batches with the amount of beef that there is. And I don't want to be in the kitchen all day. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to start to heat up the oil. Cut down a little bit of thyme. Actually, you did a good job of sharpening this knife. So the oil's nice and hot. Now I'm going to throw some of the beef in, mix it around, turn on the fan, turn it down. I also like to add a little bit of pepper, just a touch of salt while I'm doing this. Using the hand that I did that beef with. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. And we just want to cut our carrots into little rounds. If you're feeding little children this and you're not pureeing it and you're worried about choking hazards, you can always cut them into 4 to make the pieces a bit smaller, easier to chew. That way you're not worried about them choking on it. Because it's going to cook, your whole food is probably going to cook for 2.5 to 3 hours by the time it's eaten. Grab a bowl, transfer them into it. So I've got my carrots, checked on the meat. It's coming along quite nicely. This batch is almost done. And then to do some potatoes. And I'm just going to dice them. I peeled them, washed them, and I'm just going to dice them into good little chunks. Not too thick, not too thin. Too thin, they're going to get mushy. Too thick, they might take longer to cook. So essentially slice them in half. And if it's a good sized potatoes, then 3 slices down the middle. So a lot of this you can prepare ahead of time, so that when it comes time to actually putting it together, you just have to really throw it in the pot. Just if you're going to do your potatoes ahead of time, make sure that after you cut them, you put them into some cold water so they don't brown up. And then drain them before you go to use them. And I'm using about 10 medium potatoes for this whole stew, because I like potatoes. Right now, if you're receiving stuff from food bank as well. They tend to have a lot of potatoes and they're freshly grown. I believe the biggest crop right now are red potatoes. So take advantage of using them. Okay, so I have my carrots, my potatoes. I'm also going to be adding cabbage, which I've already cut up. And I'm going to be adding onions. Let's stir it in. Oh. Almost done. A little bit red, almost done. And once your first batch of beef is done, I'm just going to transfer it into a clean bowl so I can add back to the stew after. And what I like to do, you'll see me walking by, just because when you're cooking the beef, it tends to put a lot of liquid. I just take some of that out with a paper towel before adding new oil for the next batch. And I will let that heat up for a second, and then I'll put more beef in.
Yep.
To check if your oil is hot enough, I tend to take a piece of beef. I knew the oil was hot enough last time, like that, but I take a piece of beef and just set it in it, see if it starts to spit a bit. It is, so it's time to put beef in. And for spices, I'm going to use some garlic, oregano, some thyme, some pepper, and some salt. So I'm going to use about a tablespoon of garlic.
It's garlic powder.
Powder.
Yes. Not salted.
Salt, no, just garlic powder. I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of oregano. You can measure it out if you want. About a tablespoon of thyme. And then you can always add more spices at the end of salt and pepper. So I'm only going to do about half a tablespoon of pepper. Then I'll add some more at the end. I've already spiced the beef a bit with it. And again, I don't want it real salty, but I'll start with about half a tablespoon of salt. And those are your spices to use. So I'm going to start by adding my onions, just rendering them down a little bit. I'm not taking anything out of the pot. I'm leaving the beef juices and what's stuck onto the pot from the beef so that it adds a bit more flavor to it. And these will only cook for a minute or two before I add the beef back to the mixture. But you want to make sure you stir it so that they don't burn either. Once you think your onions are done enough, you can add the beef back to it. Listen it up here. Mix it up. I then sprinkle the spices on top and then mix it. And what do you think goes in next? Liquid or the other stuff? I put the other stuff in. I save the cabbage to last. Always. The reason why I do this is I tend to spill everything out as I'm adding things. Beef broth, I'm going to add 2, and then I will top off.
It's like I'm looking at you, I see it, I'm like, oh yeah.
It was on.
Yeah.
Okay. Now your ingredients in the pot with the liquid are basically, it's just covering it right at the top of it. And you let that simmer, check it periodically, heat it up, turn it down, and voila. I'll add my cabbage closer to the end though, because it will get real limpy and it's not that great.
All right. That's it. Stew a la Brian.